of the economic fallacies that have filtered into the financial services industry, but they are also the causes for a number of the things that are going on around the world today. And this is important. Those who will power need complexity. They need to confuse audience. They need to confuse the people over whom they would like to rule with man-made, artificial, unnecessary complexity. And the end justifies the means, of course, is pragmatism. Welcome to the Moneyball Method. My name is Mark Shupe, and I am the author of the book, The Moneyball Method, a Middle-Class Manifesto for Objective Investing. If you tuned into the program last week, the title was Pragmatism and Complexity. And I want to follow that subject up with a superior alternative, and that is reason and elegance. But before getting into reason and elegance, I'd like to discuss some current events, things that all of you should be very familiar with. And they have certainly been in the news in America and around the world. And before doing that, I want to discuss what are some of the causes that lead to the pragmatism and complexity that we experience in our world today. And I want to turn to the summary for part one of my book. In there, I discuss 12 fallacies that are common to economics and finance today, and I discuss some of the causes. Those include anti-reason, envy, collective rights, the greater good, victimhood, determinism, and ableism. But not only are they the causes of some of the economic fallacies that have filtered into the financial services industry, but they are also the causes for a number of the things that are going on around the world today. And this is important because objective law matters. Objective law is being denigrated both in America and around the world, both economically and financially, but also socially. And the reason that I'm discussing the social issues today is because I received a phone call on Wednesday night from somebody who is extraordinarily successful in the business world, who is very emotionally balanced, who never gets flustered with much of anything, who doesn't pay much attention to all the political nonsense around the world. And in order to set this up, I want to discuss three events that have been in the headlines. On December 4th, 2024, the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was shot in the back by a coward in a hoodie on the streets of New York. That coward in the hoodie is now being treated as a hero in many quarters throughout America. On August 22nd, 2025, Irina Zarutska was knifed in the throat by a coward in a hoodie. And she was left on the floor of a train to bleed out and die. Bystanders doing nothing. And then on September 10th, 2025, the CEO of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk, was shot with a long-range rifle while delivering a speech in front of a large crowd at an American university. All three of these people were innocent, but they had something else in common. All these three people were targets. Why were they targets? What did they have in common besides being innocent? What they had in common is that they were good. And I want to turn again to the summary from part one of my book, because this also applies to why money is debased, why prices are denigrated, why markets are demonized, and why profits are also demonized. Part one is dedicated to the virtue of money, prices, markets, and profits, with each one sharing a common theme. Why does our postmodern culture degrade money, prices, markets, and earn profit? Because they are objectively good. But explaining this far better than I can is political science professor at Clemson University, Brad Thompson. He published an article on Substack on September 16th, 2025. Regarding the murder of Irina Zarutska, and I'm quoting Brad Thompson, the murderer's deepest motive for butchering Irina Zarutska can be summed up by Ayn Rand's definition of nihilism, hatred of the good for being good. Regarding the murder of Charlie Kirk, Brad Thompson goes on to say, he was a principled conservative who loved nothing more than talking to young people of all political persuasions. His benevolence showed brightly. Let that sink in. At the deepest philosophical level, this is why he was assassinated. That is why I got the phone call on Wednesday night. It made her angry. She was confused about how and why this could happen, why it is happening more frequently, or so it seems, to innocent people for the crime of being good. But it's not so much the evildoers that pull the triggers and wield the knives. It is how they are being made into heroes in some cases, or martyrs in others. That somehow they are serving a greater purpose, that they are serving the common good. The lives of the innocent people are being minimized for the sake of those that use violence. And that, I think, is really what was so confusing about Charlie Kirk's murder. As Professor Thompson said, he was talking to young people of all political persuasions. He was using persuasion as a tool. That is the key to civilization. The murderer used violence because they certainly couldn't speak, debate, or persuade. Where does this come from? What are the cultural influences that not only incentivize and motivate people to commit acts of violence against innocent people, but what are the cultural influences that cause them to become or turned into heroes, to be lionized by thousands of people around the world, both on social media and in public demonstrations? And Brad Thompson goes on to say that this is something that has been happening since the 20th century, World War I and World War II. To quote Brad Thompson again, morally and then culturally, the post-World War II world has been defined at the highest level of abstraction by two related approaches to moral thought and action, both connected to nihilism: the will to power and the end justifies the means. And I read that quote and I immediately thought of the podcast that I hosted last week titled Complexity and Pragmatism. Those who will power need complexity. They need to confuse audience. They need to confuse the people over whom they would like to rule with man-made, artificial, unnecessary complexity. And the end justifies the means, of course, is pragmatism. And Professor Thompson goes on to talk about complexity. He says it rejects the idea there is an objective moral order that should guide our thought and action. And regarding the ends justify the means, he says, it says that the rightness or wrongness of an action depends on whether it achieves a desired goal, regardless of the methods used. The will to power, the ends justify the means. Complexity and pragmatism, we can see it throughout our culture. So besides the murderers, there is the death cults, tens of thousands of people in public demonstrations and on social media who glorify the killers and heroes and justify the murders as natural. But really what I want to talk about is the millions more who are the appeasers, who are able to rationalize in their own minds and justify on social media or on corporate media why these killers do what they do and why they're being martyred or turned into heroes by their cult followers. One way that the appeasers speak about the murders is that both sides do it. I don't think so. And I think that America is waking up to that, and that was the premise of the phone call, not both sides are doing it, but they also ignore the cultural forces that incentivize the murders and justify the hero worship. They say he alone is responsible. They're dropping context. They're ignoring the fact that the killers were indoctrinated by a culture that avoids reason, confuses economic power with political power, and rationalizes the use of force because they can't possibly apply the persuasion. They don't understand how to communicate and they don't care. But there's nothing new here. On January 1st, 1971, philosopher Ayn Rand published an essay titled The Age of Envy. And I quote, "Evil as the hating creatures are, there is something still more evil. Those who try to appease them. The appeaser chooses a state of cowardice where no danger exists. The appeaser does not sell his soul, he gives it away for free, getting nothing in return." Why do I bring that up? What does this have to do with the Moneyball method? What does this have to do with personal investing? Quite a lot. My recommendation is don't be that guy. Don't be the appeaser. There is an alternative to the will to power. There is an objective moral order. It is the elegance of free markets that are defended by objective law. And that begins with the virtues of money. As I mentioned in a previous podcast, I look at money as the legacy of productive minds, not as the root of any evil. The elegance of markets includes the information of prices. This is the decentralized knowledge of millions upon millions of participants in billions of transactions throughout the world every day who have far more information at their disposal for pursuing their own rational self-interest than any committee, any central planner, any economist, or any bureaucrat. Then there is the justice of earned profit, the vision of the entrepreneur, who has to navigate many different constituencies from customers, suppliers, employees, investors, and competitors. Earning a profit is a noble venture, it is a difficult challenge, and it is justice. But once we've established these as our foundational principles for the Moneyball method, there is still the uncertainty of the future. Market performance cannot be predicted, it cannot be controlled. What we do is control what we control and balance that against the uncertainty of the future. For that, we need to take control of our own lives, define our own goals and aspirations, assign a time and a dollar value to those, and do what Billy Beane did in the Moneyball movie and in the book and for the 2002 Oakland A's. And that is identify the factors that we can control for the lowest cost per win. But regarding the social issues that are hitting the headlines, how these cultural forces filter their way into economics and financial markets, I'd like to turn to a quote that I heard only this week, of all places, on the Greg Gutfeld show, of all places from a retired Army Green Beret by the name of Terry Shepard. He said, "Stop giving your time, money, and attention to people who have capitulated to the people who hate you. Stop appeasing the appeasers. Declare independence from the talent scouts, if you will, of the baseball world or the talent scouts of economic forecasting, market predictions. Take control of what you can control, model that against the uncertainty of the future, and don't be one of those guys." The first thing we do is identify our highest values. This requires introspection. This is the most challenging part. Then define the concrete goals that will help you achieve those values. Assign a dollar and a deadline to them. And lastly, measure success looking forward, using dollars of future wealth as the performance benchmark. Take control of your own life. Whereas Jordan Peterson is famous for saying, make your own bed. We are not going to be able to affect change in the world around us until we affect change within us. It begins with the individual. And with that, I'd like to conclude by quoting my book, the summary of part 2, last paragraph. To humanize the whole process, Chapter 8 introduced introspection for goal-directed action as the signature component for living with confidence. Why? Because each of us controls our individual character and emotions. Be that guy. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you will join me again next week.